Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining. Alright, let's do Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a dear little girl who was loved by everyone who looked at her, but most of all by her grandmother. There was nothing that she would not have given to the child. Eat, eat, eat alert, eat alert, eat alert. Okay. Once she gave her a little cap of red velvet, which suited her so that she would never wear anything else. So she was always called Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Riding Hood, here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine." Wait, isn't she a child? Take them to your grandmother. Okay. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Okay. Set out before it gets hot. And when you are going, walk nicely and quietly. Do not run off the path, or you may fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. When you go into her room, don't forget to say good morning, and don't peep into every corner before you do it. I will take great care, said Little Red Riding Hood to her mother, and gave her a hand on it. The grandmother lived out in the wood, half a league from the village. Just as Little Red Riding Hood entered the wood, a wolf met her. Red Riding Hood did not know what a wicked creature he was, and was not at all afraid of him. "Good day, Little Red Riding Hood," said he. "Thank you kindly, Wolf." "Whither away so early, Little Red Riding Hood?" "To my grandmother's." "What have you got in your apron?" I lost my place looking at the chat. "Cake and wine. Yesterday was baking day, so poor sick grandmother is to have something good to make her stronger." "Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Riding Hood?" "A good quarter of a league further in the wood. Her house stands under a large oak tree. The nut trees are just below." "You surely must know it," replied Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf thought to himself, "What a tender young creature, what a nice plump mouthful. She will be better to eat than the old woman. I must act craftily so as to catch both." So he walked for a short time by the side of Little Red Riding Hood, and then he said, "See, Little Red Riding Hood, how pretty the flowers are about here. Why do you not look around? I believe, too, that you do not hear how sweetly the little birds are singing. You walk gravely along as if you were going to school, while everything else out here in the wood is merry." Little Red Riding Hood raised her eyes when she saw the sunbeams dancing here and there through the trees, and pretty flowers growing everywhere. She thought, "Suppose I take grandmother a fresh nosegay. That would please her too. It is so early in the day that I shall still get there in good time." So she ran from the path into the wood to look for flowers. When she picked one, she fancied that she saw a still prettier one further on, and ran after it, and so got deeper and deeper into the woods. Grandma's a bit of a wino. Meanwhile, the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked at the door. "Who is there?" "Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf. "I have brought cake and wine. Open the door." "Lift the latch," called out the grandmother. "I am too weak and cannot get up." The wolf lifted the latch. The door flew open, and without saying a word, he went straight to the grandmother's bed and devoured her. Then he put on her clothes, dressed himself in her cap, laid himself in the bed, and drew the curtains. Little Red Riding Hood, however, had been running about picking flowers. When she had gathered so many that she could carry no more, she remembered her grandmother and set out on the way to her. She was surprised to find the cottage door standing open. When she went to the room, she had such a strange feeling that she said to herself, "Oh dear, how uneasy I feel today, whereas at other times I like being with grandmother so much." She called out, "Good morning," but received no answer. So she went to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother with her cap pulled far over her face and looking very, very strange. "Oh, grandmother," she said, "what big ears you have." "The better to hear you with, my child," was the reply. "But grandmother, what big eyes you have." "The better to see you with, my dear." Rubber Duck, thank you so much for subbing. Yay! Thank you guys. ASMR applause. ASMR applause, everybody. "But grandmother, what large hands you have." "The better to hug you with." "Oh, but grandmother, what a big terrible mouth you have." "The better to eat you with." Scarcely had the wolf said this, than with one bound he was out of bed and swallowed up Little Red Riding Hood. When the wolf had appeased his appetite, he lay down in the bed and fell asleep and began to snore very loud. The huntsman was just passing the house and thought to himself, "How the old woman is snoring. I must see if she wants anything." So he went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw that the wolf was lying on it. "Do I find thee here, thou old sinner?" said he. I have long sought thee." Oh my God. Then, just as he was going to fire at him, it occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother and that she still might be saved. So he did not fire, but took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the stomach of the sleeping wolf. Itchy. When he had made 2 snips, he saw the Little Red Riding Hood shining, and then he made 2 snips more, and the little girl sprang out, crying, "Ah, how frightened I've been!" How dark it was inside the wolf. And after that, the aged grandmother came out alive also, but scarcely able to breathe. Dude, it's so itchy. This like pearl that I glued on is so itchy. Red Riding Hood, however, quickly fetched great stones with which they filled the wolf's body, and when he awoke, he wanted to run away. But the stones were so heavy that he fell down all at once and fell dead. Then all 3 were delighted. The huntsman drew off all the wolf's skin and went home with it. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine which Red Riding Hood had brought and revived. But Red Riding Hood thought to herself, "As long as I live, I will never by myself leave the path and run into the wood, when my mother has forbidden me to do so." It is also related that once the Red Riding Hood was again taking cakes to the old grandmother, another wolf spoke to her, tried to entice her from the path. Red Riding Hood, however, was on her guard and went straight forward on her way. Told grandmother that she had met the wolf and that he had said good morning to her, but with such a wicked look in his eyes that if they had not been on the public road, she was certain he would have eaten her up. "Well," said the grandmother, "we will shut the door, that he may not come in." Soon afterwards the wolf knocked and cried, "Open the door, grandmother. I am Little Red Riding Hood, and I am fetching you some cakes." But they did not speak or open the door, so the graybeard stole twice or thrice round the house, and at last jumped on the roof, intending to wait until Little Red Riding Hood went home in the evening, and then to steal her after and devour her in the darkness. But the grandmother saw what was in his thoughts. In front of the house was a great stone trough, so she said to the child, "Take the pail, Red Riding Hood. I made some sausages yesterday, so carry the water in which I boiled them to the trough." Red Riding Hood carried the great trough. It was quite full. Carried until the great trough was quite full. Then the smell of sausages reached the wolf, and he sniffed and peeped down, and at last stretched out his neck so far that he could no longer keep his footing, and began to slip, and slipped down from the roof straight into the great trough, and was drowned. Then Red Riding Hood went joyously home, and never did anything to harm anyone. I know, what's with the sausages? I was so caught off guard by the sausage mention. Interesting. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Okay. Let's see what else we have. Hello, Aaron. If you have any more costumes with Velcro on them, do you think maybe you could include it as a trigger in the stream? If it is accessible for me to like do the Velcro like I did with this one, then yes, for sure. There will definitely be another day with Velcro, for sure. I have one day with an array of costumes, actually. Sleeping Beauty. Did we ever do Sleeping Beauty? Alright, Sleeping Beauty. Not Hunk. Good night. A long time ago, there were a king and queen who said every day, "Ah, if only we had a child." But they never had one. But it happened that once, when the queen was bathing, a frog crept out of the water onto the land and said to her, "Your wish shall be fulfilled. Before a year has gone by, you shall have a daughter." What the frog had said came true, and then the queen had a little girl who was so pretty that the king could not contain himself for joy, and ordered a great feast. He invited not only his kindred friends and acquaintance, but also the wise women, in order that they might be kind and well disposed towards the child. There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but as he had only 12 golden plates for them to eat out of, one of them had to be left at home. The feast was held with all manner of splendor, and when it came to an end, the wise women bestowed their magic gifts upon the baby. One gave virtue, another beauty, a third riches, and so on, with everything in the world that one could wish for. What 11 of them had made their promises, suddenly the 13th came in. She wished to avenge herself, not for having been invited, and without greeting or even looking at anyone. She cried with a loud voice, "The king's daughter shall in her 15th year prick herself with a spindle and fall down dead." And without saying a word more, she turned round and left the room. They were all shocked, but the 12th, whose good wish still remained unspoken, came forward, and as she could not undo the evil sentence, but only soften it, she said, "It shall not be death, but a deep sleep of 100 years, into which the princess shall fall." The king, who would fain keep his dear child from the misfortune, gave orders that every spindle in the whole kingdom should be burnt. Meanwhile, the gifts of the wise women were oh my gosh, plenteously fulfilled on the young girl, for she was so beautiful, modest, good-natured, and wise that everyone who saw her was bound to love her. It happened that on the very day when she was 15 years old, the king and queen were not at home, and the maiden was left in the palace, quite alone. So she went round into all sorts of places, looked into rooms and bedchambers just as she liked, and at last came to an old tower. She climbed up the narrow, winding staircase and reached a little door. A rusty key was in the lock, and when she turned it, the door sprang open. There was a little room, sat an old woman with a spindle, busily spinning her flax. "Good day, old dame," said the king's daughter. "What are you doing here?" "I'm spinning," said the old woman, and nodded her head. "What sort of thing is that rattles round so merrily?" said the girl. She took the spindle and wanted to spin too. But scarcely had she touched the spindle when the magic decree was fulfilled. She pricked her finger with it. In the very moment when she felt the prick, she fell down upon the bed that stood there and lay in a deep sleep. This sleep extended over the whole palace. The king and queen, who had just come home and entered the great hall, began to go to sleep, and the whole of the court with them. The horses, too, went to sleep in the stable, the dogs in the yard, the pigeons upon the roof, and the flies on the wall. Even the fire that was flaming on the hearth became quiet and slept. The roast meat left off frizzling, and the cook, who was just going to pull the hair of the scullery boy because he had forgotten something, let him go and went to sleep. The wind fell, and the trees before the castle, not a leaf moved again. Night Owl, thank you so much for the 5 gifted subs. Guys, we're moving on up in the world. Thank you so much. Thank you. ASMR applause in the chat for Night Owl. But round the castle there began to grow a hedge of thorns, which every year became higher, and at last grew close up round the castle and all over it, so that there was nothing of it to be seen, not even the flag upon the roof. But the story of the beautiful sleeping Briar Rose, for so the princess was named, went about the country, so that from time to time kings' sons came and tried to get through the thorny hedge into the castle. But they found it impossible, for the thorns held fast together as though they had hands, and the youths were caught in them, could not get loose again, and died a miserable death. After long, long years, a king's son came again to that country, and heard an old man talking about the thorn hedge, and that a castle was said to stand behind it with a wonderfully beautiful princess named Briar Rose, had been asleep for 100 years, and that the king and queen and the whole court were asleep likewise. He had heard too from his grandfather that many kings' sons had already come and had tried to get through the thorny hedge, but they had remained stuck fast in it and had died a pitiful death. Then the youth said, "I am not afraid. I will go and see the beautiful Briar Rose." The good old man tried to dissuade him as best he could, but the youth would not listen to his words. But by this time, the 100 years had just passed, and the day had come when Briar Rose was to wake again. When the king's son came near the thorn hedge, it bloomed large and beautiful flowers, which parted from each other on their own accord and let him pass unhurt, before closing again behind him like a hedge. In the castle yard he saw the horses and the spotted hounds lying asleep. On the roof he saw the pigeons with their head under their wings. When he entered the home, the flies were asleep on the wall. The cook in the kitchen was still holding out his hand to seize the boy, and the maid was sitting by the black hen which she was going to pluck. He went on farther, and in the great hall he saw the whole of the court lying asleep, and up by the throne lay the king and the queen. When he went still on farther, and all was so quiet that a breath could be heard. And at last he came to the tower and opened the door into the little room where Briar Rose was sleeping, where she lay so beautiful that she could not turn his eyes away. When he stooped down and gave her a kiss, as soon as he kissed her, Briar Rose opened her eyes and awoke and looked at him quite sweetly. Then they went down together. The king awoke, and the queen and the whole court, and looked at each other in great astonishment. And the horses in the courtyard stood up and shook themselves. The hounds jumped up and wagged their tails. The pigeons upon the roof pulled out their heads from under their wings, looked around, and flew into the open country. The flies on the wall crept again. The fire in the kitchen burned up and flickered and cooked the meat. The joint began to turn and frizzle again. The cook gave the boy such a box in the ear that he screamed, and the maid plucked down the fowl ready for the spit. When the marriage of the king's son with Briar Rose was celebrated with all splendor, they lived contented to the end of their days. Wow, that was the only one that we have read from this book that had a happy ending. All the other ones were like really dark and like a little just like bleak at the end. Wow. The real stories have always been dark. Yeah, this is the only one that wasn't. I'm so surprised. Because usually, yeah, they all have been like a little grim at the end. Ooh, I have a dry mouth. Time to wet the whistle. Stacks, thank you. Alright guys, that's gonna do it for me tonight. Thank you for joining. Little ASMR time, little reading time. I really like these mics. It sounds nice. We've got a new angle unlocked here for the stream, which I really like. I think we'll keep it.